So Bob Crouse, International Fancy Guppy Association. So I would speak from my personal experience about, I would say about 10 years ago, I started, I wanted to get back into fancy guppies. I'm sort of an ornamental fish guy. And, you get onto the internet and you find you pretty soon you run into the International Fancy Guppy Association. And this is their chapters all around the U.S., Canada, as well as other countries in the world. But Chicago was a particularly active a chapter. So I told my daughter I was going to visit if I could stay over, and then I went I went to attend their meetings. Um, it's the Chicago chapter was about, I would say, 10 to 15 people, and all they do is just this one thing, and they are remarkably nice to you. Okay, it's like you show up, they've never seen you before, and in about 30 minutes, you're part of the group. I also drove to Detroit for one of their annual meetings. They had, again, so now it was like 25, 30 people. Um, and again, it's like just it's a small club of people who don't have to discuss, they don't have to justify why they like a particular fish. So we had our annual banquet at somebody's backyard, and you walk through their fish room, and you like that fish, okay, they'll scoop it out for you. So really great. Bob Crouse is the member of IFGA. He's sort of like IFGA actually. Okay, as I look at it, he's got most of the positions there. He's the webmaster, the editor, the historian. He also has a little business of his own called Professional Guppy Keeping. And he and I spoke a couple of times, and then we actually we have a dry run for this meeting on a couple of days before the meeting itself. So I saw Bob for the first time, and I knew I liked him right away because I looked at Bob and I said, this is the person that understands me, because we're sort of the same generation. In the '60s, people who grew up in the '60s, they used to say, "Don't trust anybody over 30." So Bob and I grew up, in the '50s when we used to say, "Don't trust anybody under 30." Okay. So I hope Bob is ready to speak. I'm not sure if you like Bob. I like Bob because I'm pretty sure we watched the same cartoons together as kids, probably in black and white. Bob, are you there?
I am.
Okay, terrific. I'm going to stop sharing, and you're on.
Oh, thank you, Willie. Oh, thank you for the kind words, and thanks to everybody for joining in tonight. There we are. So thanks again for joining us tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about guppies. I wanted to make this program available to everybody, from the beginner to the advanced person. So some of it you're going to hear a couple times, heard it many times in your life. Sometimes you may not have heard it. So let me get to the next slide. My topics are going to start with where to begin. So where to begin? Your plan and your goal is where you want to begin. Most people think about guppies, they're going to run out to the pet store, buy a pair of guppies, throw them in a tank, and they're going to let the nature happen. Well, that's not really what you want to do. You want to have a plan and you want to have a goal. Without a plan and a goal, you're going to most certainly make a lot of mistakes. First choice you want to make, do you want a home display tank? Or are you thinking about getting into breeding show guppies? A lot of people didn't know that anything like this ever existed. I was fortunate enough to follow it when I was a boy, but you ask most people on the street and you say breeding show guppies, they have no clue on what you're talking about. The IFGA, which is the International Fancy Guppy Association, they have 74 classes or colors to compete in. So think about that, 74 different strains, colors that you can choose from, specialize in one or more than one, many of them. So let's look at the beginning of your plan. You're going to need to decide if you're going to do a home display, are you going to do only guppies, or are you going to do a community tank? You can do either one. That's fine if that's your interest. If you're going to move to show guppies, are you going to do one class, which is a strain, or are you going to do more? For my particular set up, I have going on about 6 different strains in my room, which is which is a downfall. I have too many strains. I should have a little less than that. I'm running about 55 tanks in my room. Your next thing you want to look at is your equipment selection in where to begin. So for your home display, what you're only going to have guppies, you should decide if you want to raise the young. Now remember that a female guppy delivers every 28 to 32 days. So think about that. Once a month, you're going to have a bunch of babies to decide what you want to do with them. She's also going to have between 10 and 50 babies, depending on her age. Sometimes it can be more than that, 50 babies. So ideally, what you would like to do, or if you can do, is set up a birthing tank to raise the fry. Fry left to grow in the same large tank as the parents are going to be smaller and develop at a really slow rate if they develop at all. These considerations are going to dictate your number of tanks and how many tanks. For a community tank, it must be large enough to provide enough free swimming area and places to have some cover for hiding, just in case you can't catch the babies, so they have a place to hide from being eaten. The reason babies won't fully develop is that they'll compete for food against the adults most times. Most times they're going to lose out on that competition. So feeding more is not the answer in that case, because uneaten food is going to foul the tank and harbor bacteria, making the whole tank susceptible to illness and disease. So if you decide to keep your babies, I recommend a small tank to raise them to maturity. You get them up to 2-3 months where they're at least half the size of the adults and they can compete better with the food. So if you're going to show guppies, now this is a whole different area. To set up to show guppies, you want to have ideally about 9 to 12 tanks per strain. This entails setting up a separate strain into 2 lines for crossing, separating males and females when you can sex them, which is typically right around 2 months, depending on the size of the fish and how good your eyes are. Although you can do it with less tanks, you'll have better results with 9 to 12 tanks. That's been proven. Another thing to keep in mind, it takes a lot of trial and error before you can place consistently in competition in the IFGA. I've noticed that it takes, and this is my own observation, and it takes close to about 5 years to see your name consistently in any ranking in the point system. Before that, you can get in a little bit earlier if you're lucky, but to stay consistent, about 5 years of experience in planning and setting up your fish room and in raising your strains, setting your lines is what it's going to take for your name to show up there consistently. The more trial and error is the more tanks you may need. I recommend reading the IFGA judging book to get a handle on what the judges are looking for and to understand the point system. If you don't know what the judges are looking for or understand how to point the fish, if you're going to raise show guppies, then you can't really raise them effectively. If you do some observation at any of the shows, you get to learn a lot this way, and you'll get to know what they're looking for. You'll get to know the point system where you can actually look in your own tanks and pick out your fish that you're going to show. It'll stop a lot of disappointment when you enter a fish and nothing places. The next topic you're going to do when you want to begin is select a location. The location of your guppy aquarium is important. If you're setting up a single display tank, choose a spot away from the windows. Sunlight will cause temperature fluctuations and promote algae growth. That's going to cause a lot of problems with your fish and with your tank. If you're planning to raise show guppies, you have a few options. Concentrating on one strain with the 9 to 12 tank plan, you could use individual in-tank heaters. However, most breeders choose to have a dedicated fish room. Fish rooms need to be planned carefully. You need to plan for lighting, heating, water excess, and drainage. Remember, you got to do a lot of water changes but the more fish you have. If you choose this option, I suggest picking a spot in your basement and making a drawing to see how everything will fit. It gets a little hard to be so slow with your planning on things, but if you plan carefully, everything will work much better. Next suggestion I have is to talk to veteran breeders about their fish rooms. Most breeders have redesigned their fish rooms quite a few times and will help you save time and money in your planning. Sit down with somebody at one of the shows, ask questions. None of the people at any of the IFGA shows will ever turn down talking to you about anything if you have a question. There's no question that's a stupid question, so don't be shy. Come up to anybody, ask a question, ask to see a fish room. Any of the IFGA shows that you attend regionally do have fish room tours. Go on in there, ask permission to take a couple pictures, get your ideas on equipment and your layout, and take those things back home. You might, find out some things that you never thought of, things that you want to do that you'd like to do. So the next thing we're going to look at is choosing your stock. Now I'm going to move ahead to another slide here to show you some more pictures of show guppies, because I'm going to be talking about choosing your stock. You always want to buy the best possible stock you can afford. Whether you're choosing a display tank, breeding show guppies, or just want to have some great guppies for yourself, always buy the best possible fish. I'm not going to disparage any chain pet stores, but they buy their stock from fish farms. Fish farms are designed to provide volume, not necessarily quality. Their guppies are raised in huge outside vats filled with hundreds of fish. They are medicated and medicated again in the store when they get there on arrival. Can you get them to breed true? It's doubtful. Will they ever have a place in a show competition? No, they won't. Find yourself a breeder who knows the lineage of the fish. This breeder will get you a good start rather than disappointment and frustration. Remember what I said about volume? Sick or dead fish means repeat business for the pet store. Wouldn't you rather just make one purchase? Choosing the breeder. When you choose your breeder, look for a breeder who has the fish you want. If you like Asian types, search for that type of breeder, someone who specializes in them. If you want to show guppies, visit ifga.org and select a strain you like. If you go there, you can see all the different strains, a representative picture of all the strains. There's a few examples here. These are males that I'm showing you up here now. These are females. You want to look at these females. I don't think you'll see a female like this in any pet store. They're just as beautiful as the males, in my opinion. So when you go to this breeder, what you want to do is reach out to a local club. If it's an IFGA guppy or an Asian type, clubs are going to offer you the most help in locating a reputable breeder. Ask questions, ask many questions. If you're thinking of buying on the internet, ask for pictures. And if the picture that you're thinking about buying represents the fish being sold, if it is not the case, you may be in for an unwanted surprise. A lot of times, whether it's a private ad or a website that specializes in selling fish, you'll see a great ad, great price, looks like the fish you want. You order the fish, you get it home, looks nothing like what was on the website. So what happens? You go back and you tell them that, and they say, well, that was the parents. So what I'm saying about choosing the breeder is that breeder doesn't understand how to breed fish true. He may have had great parents to start out with, didn't have a plan, didn't follow proper breeding techniques, and his fish are inbred too much, look nothing like the parents 3-4 generations down the line. So if you're doing a display tank, you want to think about some tank mates. Stick to some peaceful species. Also, fish with smaller mouths. That's the key. A lot of people say, oh, this fish looks good. It should be able to go in with my tank. Even somebody in a pet store might tell you, oh, yeah, you can do that. If you look at that fish, if that fish's mouth is quite as big as a body of a guppy, more than likely he's going to think that guppy's food. Be cautious of fin nippers. That's one other thing. You know, these beautiful fins that we have on these fish, um, they may start out looking like this, and you put them in with some barbs, for instance. They're going to look at nighttime as a little snack on those big caudal fins, and they're going to have big tears and rips, and that fish isn't going to last too long. So you got to make the choice then. You want to get rid of your expensive, beautiful guppies, or you want to get rid of your barbs. Either way, you wanted to have both, but you don't want to have to make that choice. So besides those tank mates, what you want to do is keep a cleanup crew in your tanks, whether it's a display tank or even show guppies. Most breeders and show guppies have cory catfish to clean up the bottom for the uneaten food that may fall down there. They keep a pleco or two in their tanks to keep the slime off the sides, keep that clear. All those things help out your fish that are inhabiting the tank. Just remember, don't overcrowd your tanks. There's one other caution I wanted to tell you. If you're just getting into fish, or maybe you're not aware of some fish, I know I made this mistake when I was younger. Chinese algae eaters. Um, they they have that name, but they're not actually algae eaters. They eat very little algae, to be honest. They eat slime coats. And what happens is a Chinese algae eater at night, when the lights are off, they like to stick on the sides of the guppies and eat the slime coats. So you're wondering, why are my guppies dying? You think it's a problem with your guppies. It's not a problem with the guppies at all. It's the Chinese algae eater. Not recommended to keep with guppies. Let's see here. We're going to go to maintenance and care. We're going to talk a little bit about guppy feedings. If you're going to do a community tank, you just want to do a couple of light feedings a day. And you want to buy the best dry food available and combine it with newly hatched baby brine shrimp. See the size of these fish that we're talking about here. They look nothing like what you see in a pet store. To get to this size, they need good quality food, and they're not going to do it on just dry food. Newly hatched brine shrimp is one of the key ingredients. We also feed beef heart, small quantities. Key to everything is small quantities, something they can eat in about 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, and not overfeed. Anything left in the tank is not going to do the fish any benefit. It's just going to foul the water, cause problems for you. So when you get to show guppies with feeding, show guppies do best with 4 or more feedings a day. This puts size and provides the nutrition they need to develop. Guppies have a pass-through rate of every 2 to 3 hours. So really, if you're very dedicated, every 2 to 3 hours, you can feed your guppies to get them up to size. And more than likely, if you're that kind of a breeder, you'll have one of the bigger fish on the show bench. A breeder always uses bare bottom tanks. Although some of the pretty gravel and things that other people have are beautiful with these guppies, we're feeding so much that you got to use a bare bottom tank. And the purpose of this is to help with keeping it clean. Bare bottom tank, you can go in there and use a hose or something and suck the waste and the uneaten food off the bottom, keep it nice and clean, and do it real quickly. Can't really do that with gravel that much, especially when you have 50, 60 tanks in a room. To talk a little bit about filtration. Filtration for community tanks, you've got a lot of different options. The old under-gravel filter tanks, they worked real well. They still do. Hang-on tanks on the back, those are great ones too. They have so many different ones now. They've come so far over the years. Most all of them compare to each other. Remember, the what you spend on what you buy in filtration, the more you can afford, the better you can also. Now, there's also canister filters, and there are in-tank filters. You can just choose what you like best, actually. Ask some questions of people who have fish if you're not familiar with the different filtration types. A lot of it is ease of use. And if you're if you're comfortable with a canister filter, if you're comfortable with a hang-on back filter, use what you like best. But just remember to follow the directions, keep your tanks clean. Now, if you're doing show guppy tanks with filtration, most of all of us breeders and basically all of us breeders use the old box type canister filters. And not sure if you're familiar with that. Let me get to a slide which will show that. Um, Up in the upper right corner here is an old luster box filter. And that's, you can still get these. There's a company called Gemco, Jehmco, and you find them online. There's also, other brands out there. Penplex makes smaller ones. These jumbo ones work well. I even keep some of these in my 5-gallon tanks, and they do a good job. And what you do with these, you put a layer on the bottom, a heavy layer of what you like to use. I use just marbles. Other people use the ceramic rings. They can use, charcoal. Depends on what you have in your water. You can use other products on the bottom for weight to keep the filter down. Now, on top of that weight that you have, you want to use a filter floss. That's what it used to be called in the old days. Now it's just pillow stuffing. You can go to, your Hobby Lobby and buy pillow stuffing and use that in there. It's real inexpensive. And that way, when you're changing it, you're not throwing out a ton of money. So when you're doing show guppies, you do your filters. I do mine every couple of weeks. Depends on how much I'm feeding, how many fish are in the tank. The heavier load in the tank, the dirtier the filter. More feedings require more cleanup. So with your filters, you won't be changing filters as much as you change water. So let's talk about water. Um, if you're going to start out with guppies, a couple tools you'll need. Buy yourself a good pH tester and a hardness tester. You can buy them real inexpensive on the internet, and they have some nice digital ones for $5, $6 on the internet. You just dip it in there, turn it on, and it tells you your reading. You want to test your water before putting your stock in when you cycle your tank. You set up your tank, whether it be a display tank or you're doing show guppies, set it up, you let it cycle. I let mine cycle 3, 4, 5 days before I do anything with it at all. You want to let it go through that. Then you do a water test. Here in the Midwest, where I'm at in the Chicago area, our tap water is pretty reliable. You go to other areas uh, who are on well water. Some people have been close to strip mines, and when you stick that gauge in there, you'd be surprised at your readings. So you want to know what you're dealing with before you put any fish in there. If you see that your readings are way out of whack, then you have to use chemicals or other means to buffer that water. Guppies themselves, they do best at around 7 pH or higher. The ideal water hardness for guppies is about 8 to 12 GH. And your TDS, total dissolved solids, where I keep my tanks right now is around 100 to 120. There are people who, like for example, like I was talking to somebody who's living on a strip mine, they're up around 600, 700. That's way, they had to use RO water for their tanks. But you need to know, the whole point of this is you need to know what you're dealing with before you put your stock in there. You can put some beautiful fish in there that you've paid some good money for and put them in that water, and in a few days they're dying and you don't know why. Nothing you did, it's your water. Here's something else that I deal with in Chicago area. I'm in a suburb of Chicago, and spring and fall, they use different chemicals in the water. So beware of that. If they do that in your community, test your water all the time. You'll see that when you're testing your water, there's a change. All of a sudden, I did a water change. My parameters are way out the window. What's going on here? Well, your village may have put some additives in for either winter time or summertime. So that that tells you what you need to do on your end to keep your fish healthy. So water changes are one of the most important things to have healthy guppies. If you have a high content of ammonia, if you have nitrates or nitrites, they all play havoc on the finnage of the fish. There are many ways to do your water changes. Some breeders change 15% daily. So you just estimate this. It's your volume of your tank that you're using, whether it's a display or show guppies, about 15% a day. If that's what you can do, that's okay. My schedule doesn't permit me to do that every day. So I do a weekly water change. Most times I'm doing it every 4 days because of the load I have in my tanks. But when I do that water change, at that point, I'm doing 60 to 70%. So in my case, it's more like 70%, and I'm doing it every 4 days. So, you got to determine your own schedule. Most every one of us are working. So you do stuff in the evenings, you do it on the weekends. My water changes will come on weekends because I'm working or in school. So you want to test your water and you want to watch your fish. Now, this is key, even with your water changes. Are your fish hanging at the top? Or are they swimming at various levels? If they're swimming at various levels and there's no issues, they're okay. They're hanging at the top, gasping for air. There's something wrong with that water. So does your water look okay? Does it look dingy instead of clear? You may do a water change and 2 days later you're looking at your water and it's looking a little yellowish and you're thinking, wow, I got 3 more days to go for a water change. Now something's not right. Use your instincts, look at that, and that's going to save you some fish, save you some problems. So there may be something going on in there. There might be a dead plecostomus in that tank that you didn't realize it fouling the water. But keep that stuff in mind. There are a lot of things that affect water quality. Waste is one. Uneaten food is one. Uneaten food is one of the biggest ones. Uneaten food would cause problems with water. So don't overfeed your fish. Overcrowding a tank is another problem. A lot of people, especially with guppies, like I was talking about, that female's having her babies every 28 to 32 days. She's having, 50 babies on me. I don't care. I'm leaving them in the tank because they're beautiful. Well, you've gone from 2 to 3 guppies to, in a couple of months, you've got over 100 fish in that tank. That load is way too much. The old rule of thumb way back in the dinosaur age when I was a kid was 1 inch of fish for 1 gallon of water. It's hard to do that sometimes, but it does work. And you got to remember, count your catfish you have in there for your cleanup crew, count your plecostomus in that count. So that does work really well. So let's move on to some lighting. Lighting, what I have found for guppies, 8 to 12 hours of continual light is great for them. They are like us. They have a nighttime, they have a daytime. They sleep at night. So that 8 to 12 hours, they're up. And what are they doing in 8 to 12 hours? They're going to eat for us, which is what we want to do. Community tank, that keeps them healthy. Show guppy tank, you're feeding them as much as possible. Get that size, get that big finnage on them. And that's what you want to accomplish in that 8 to 12 hours. Your choice of lighting is going to depend on your needs. If you decide to raise plants in your tanks, which is great for guppies too, go ahead, but you got to keep in mind the type of lighting you're using. It depends on the type of plants you're using. When you choose plants that you like, make sure you follow the lighting recommendations for that plant. Not all of them are the same. Some of them are very slow growers. Some of them are very fast growers. Some of them need foreground planting. Some of them need background planting. Some of them are floating. It's all different kinds. You just have to make a decision. Do research on that, just like you're doing everything else, what works for you. Now, when you get to show guppies, there's a whole different way of doing things. There's breeders that use just only the room lights for their fish room. And that's fine. There's not a problem with that. There's other people who use row lighting on their shelves above their tanks. It all depends on what you're doing. You know, one thing with show guppies in the IFGA shows, you want to make sure that you kind of try to match your lighting to what you're going for at the shows. So attend a couple shows, look at the lighting there, because what you don't want to do is see your fish in your tanks and think you have, say a blue or a green guppy, and get it to the showroom, put it up on the bench, you enter it as this beautiful blue guppy, and it gets disqualified. Why does it get disqualified? Well, it's purple. Why does it look purple? Well, that show lighting is different from what you have in your room. So try to match it as close as you can. Make sure that your lighting works for you that way. And that, unless you have time to get to the show and let your fish calm down and do it under those lights, doing it that way is going to work the best for you. There's all kinds of different lights that you use. If you're talking about a display tank, you can use the old fluorescent lights. You can use incandescent like they used to use. LEDs are the latest and greatest, and they're beautiful lights. They're the least expensive to run, but they're the most costly to buy. But on the other hand, they do last long. You're not replacing the bulbs like we used to in my day, where every 2-3 weeks you're going out and buying new bulbs, which are costing you just as much as your fish. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about heat. Uh, Heat is important in your fish room or in your tank. Uh, you don't want to just set up a guppy tank and don't put a heater in it. Guppies, they need to be in about 68 to 72 degrees, 74 degrees, right in that range. They say the best is 72. I know a couple breeders that have it in the low 60s and they're okay with that. Some of them have it as high as 80 degrees and they're okay with that. One thing about guppies, the lower the temperature, the longer the life. The lower the temperature, the more susceptible they are to catching diseases. So there's a trade-off there. The warmer the temperature, the shorter the lifespan, but they can also be the fastest growing and the healthier fish. So you got to find your medium. My fish room, I use a central heater in the fish room. I don't heat individual tanks because my electric bill would be through the roof. So I put one heater in there. My fish room stays 72 to 74 degrees. When I first started out, I used to keep it 78 to 80 degrees. Not having as many tanks as other guys, I wanted my fish to grow fast so I could compete with them. What I found out, the mistake I was making is a lot of my fish would grow to a certain height, a certain size, and they'd die. Their metabolism was just too fast. So I backed off on my heat a little bit, keep it in a mid range, keep that fish a little bit longer. They not only develop better, they last a little bit longer that way. So that goes for your heat. Let's see where we are with the slides here. I want to talk about going back to the choosing your stock. I didn't explain this slide to you, and I want to do that. On the top of the slide are examples of pet store guppies. And I made this slide with the intention of showing you the difference. Everybody knows what those pet store guppies look like, and I'm not going to mention the name of these pet stores. They can be mom and pops or they can be the chains. But those are pretty common. That's what you would find coming out of Florida, out of the fish farms to the pet stores. Look at how slender and fat, skinny they are. The fins are not developed very well. And look at the pictures below. Um, Look at the difference between the two. And sure, these fish on below are being bred for show purposes. Uh, doesn't mean you can't have them in your display tank. If you do everything right with some of the basics I've told you here tonight, you can keep your fish looking like this and not like the ones up above. Um, they're going to cost you a little bit more initially, but look at what you'll have between the difference between the two. So let me go to the slide that I wanted to talk about moving forward. So going forward here, we're going to talk a little bit about disease treatment, disease prevention. The first part of disease treatment and prevention with all guppies is recognition. Uh, Through the 50 years that I've been in this, there are guppy breeders, hobbyists who are constantly asking other people questions. Hey, my guppy's doing this or that, or looks like this. What's going on? It's hard to help them if you don't see the fish. Uh, the one bit of advice that I give everybody is look at your fish. And when I mean look at your fish, not just pass by it and say, oh, that fish is beautiful, it's swimming nice. Stand there and watch the fish. Watch the fish swim. Watch that fish when you drop in food. Is it rising up to the top to get that food, which is the case most guppies will? Will it come to the front when you walk in front of that fish tank? Or is it just kind of hanging around in back or hanging up at the top, hanging down on the bottom and not moving? All these are signs that something's going on there. And that's the first thing that's going to tell you. Hey, you've got a guppy that's laying on the bottom in the back there. He looks fine and everything, but he's just not coming up to get his food. Just like dogs or cats or anything else, they can't tell you what's wrong with them. You have to see if there's something going on. Now, it's not always easy to determine what, other than say ick, where it's got the little white spots all over the body, what's going on with that fish. But if you talk to other breeders, or even if you join one of these local clubs that we have, IFGA, has, what is it, 18 regional clubs. So pretty much anywhere in your area, you can find an IFGA local club. And you could call a fellow member and say, hey, I got a tank of guppies here and they're all look like they're dancing. They're twirling around off the bottom and swimming crazy. What's going on? Hey, the guy on the other end's going to say, yeah, I had that problem before. This is it. This is what I used to treat it. And a lot of times these treatments that they're going to tell you may not be something you can buy on the shelf in a pet store. It may be just things that they've done that works. Myself, I have learned that a lot of things you can do for treating your fish requires no medication. It requires doing massive water changes, raising the temperature to what they can tolerate, and just recognizing what's going on. Now, there are times that your treatment needs more than just doing something simple as that. If you need to use a treatment and you've talked to somebody or you've gone to a store and you've determined what it is and you buy the treatment, most important thing I can tell you is follow the instructions. If it says on there, don't feed your fish for a certain amount of days, don't feed your fish for a certain amount of days. It's not going to kill them. It's going to make that medicine work. It's going to make them treat whatever that illness is. It's hard to hold back. Your guppies, you get attached to them and you think, oh my God, I was feeding these fish 4 or 5 times a day. And now it's telling me don't feed them for 3 days. Well, don't feed them for 3 days because odds are if it's an internal parasite, you're feeding that parasite. You're not feeding the fish. Prevention. Prevention, what that means is prevent disease, sickness of any kind. You're going to go back to the basics. And everybody knows this who breeds fish. Basics in everything, if you remember them, will always work for you. Don't overcrowd your tanks. Do your water changes. Do your filter changes. That's prevention. If you see one sick fish in a tank and all others look fine, pull that fish out of there, put him in a hospital tank, and watch the others. Chances are, if there's one sick fish, the other ones will be sick. But if you catch it in time, you can treat the others far less than you can that one and save all of them and maybe only lose the one. And that's your prevention. Now, the last thing I want to touch on here is, the conclusion. Sorry. So what I've written here is whether you choose to raise guppies for home or for show, read and ask questions. Don't be shy. You know, when I went to my first IFGA show, and I had a display tank, and I was thinking I wanted to do this, and I thought, okay, I'm going to have to. These guys are professionals. I'm going to have to walk around with a little notebook and steal some ideas, and I'll get the tips, and I'll surprise them. No, don't do that. Just walk up and say, hey, I want to get started in this. I don't know how to start, or hey, I've got some guppies at home. um, can you help me get into this? Every single one of them will help you. This organization, it really is amazing, and I'm not here as a salesman. We are more like a family. There's no cutthroat competition here at all. If you or I competing against each other, there's no hard feelings against me losing against you or vice versa. Everybody here, their goal is to raise the best possible fish and share them with others. So ask your questions at a show. These shows are free to the public. So, you can go to ifga.org, get our show schedule, see all the shows that are out there for the season. Unfortunately, with the pandemic last year, we wound up canceling every single show. This year, it looks like we've got a couple cancellations already, but we may be able to pull things out and finish off the rest of the year, which I'm hoping everything will, especially if these vaccines come through. So they're free to the public. You can come in usually on Sunday morning. You can walk through the fish room. Feel free to ask somebody a question if you see something you like and don't understand it. Everybody that is there to help you. We have auctions on that Sunday. So this is the thing about this. The only place to get these show fish to buy them are usually at these shows, and usually the breeder is there of the fish that they are auctioning off on that Sunday. So if you buy a bag of fish and that breeder is there, that's where you want to ask your questions. Hey, where did this line come from? Is it going to breed true? Are there any tricks I need to keep these fish in the condition they're in for the whole time I have them? Those are the questions you want to ask them, and you can't do that anywhere else. So, the whole thing I'm saying is we're all happy to help in any way. There's a library on the ifga.org website. There's a part of it that's free to the public. Great beginners articles there. If you choose to join, which is really minimal, I think it's $25 a year, or you can become a lifetime member, which in the long run you wind up not spending much money. I think it's $150 now for a lifetime member. That's for your whole life. It never expires. You can get access to the archives and go back and look at different articles throughout the years, going way back to this organization started in '65. So there's a lot of that stuff is there throughout the years. There's a monthly eBulletin, which I happen to publish for them. The contents of it are articles by all the big breeders and a lot of past articles that I publish because old information is good information from 50 years ago till today. So keep this in mind if you want to do this, and reach out to me if you have any questions. I'll be happy to do that. And that's all I've got to say for my presentation. I hope that everybody found something useful in this. And if not, please contact me. I can help you out. Hang around in our chat coming up, and I'll answer any question you have. Thank you.
Before we get too far, Bob, I've been kind of jotting down a couple of the questions that have popped up, and I thought maybe we could just go through them and you could offer a couple of answers.
Sure.
During one of the parts, you were talking about Siamese algae eaters coming and sucking on the sides of the guppies during the night. Have you had a similar experience with Otocinclus, or are they good to go?
Well, Otocinclus are very, very timid fish. Actually, if you do have those for your tank, you will probably have to put some plants in there because they are timid enough to where they like to hide. And if you do have them, you need to keep them in a small school. They generally don't do good in groups of less than 4 or 5, and they are very harmless. They will not bother the guppies.
Good. And speaking of plants, you've talked about keeping guppies in bare bottom tanks. Are you using any floating plants in there with the fish, or are you just bare bottom, bare tank?
A lot of the breeders, it's a mix. Most breeders don't use any. There's a bunch of us that like plants on the side. So I use guppy grass. Guppy grass is a low light floating type of plant, and it grows very prolifically. So if you buy yourself 1 or 2 bunches, started in a well lighted area of 1 tank, it'll quickly grow, and you can start spreading that through all your tanks and supply all your tanks with it. It's a good one.
Good.
One,
and talking about
hornwort will do the same as guppy grass. Those are the 2 I like.
And talking about filtration a little bit, there was a comment about pillow stuffing and it needing to be fireproofed. I did a little research, and it looks like you need to read the label to make sure you're just getting plain old polyfill, because you're suggesting plain old polyfill, not some other type of treated pillow stuffing. Is that right?
Yeah, you're correct. It's polyfill. And there's a couple brands out there. The one I use, I think, is called Morning Glory. I buy a big box. I think it's a 10-15 pound box. It's the best way to buy it. And they do have it in smaller amounts if you don't have the place to store it. I think the bag is like a pound bag. Very inexpensive, but it is a polyfill. Yeah, it's not flammable or anything like that.
Do you use sponge filters in your guppy tanks, or do you just like those polyfill Gemco type filters?
Well, I tried both when I was first starting out. The thing I didn't like about the sponge filters is they didn't filter as well. They tended to clog on the outside so much, and I believe that's because of the baby brine shrimp. I do use a mini sponge filter in a little, it's a little half quart, I believe, tank that I keep some fry in, only because they don't make a box filter that small. But I'm a true believer of the box filters.
And when you were talking about raising babies, I remember you saying to move, if you really want to raise guppies, you need to move the mom into another tank so that the babies have a chance to grow on their own and not compete with adults. But are there other comments that you might share, or maybe we want to hold that for the breakout group and you could talk a little bit more about specifically raising baby guppies? Because if you're trying to get into a strain or develop, some guppies at home, that could be something that people might like a little more information. Would that be a better thing to wait on the breakout room for, Bob?
I tell you what, we can mix it both ways. I could talk all day on raising babies. So I'll just give you a little taste now, and then people can ask me further in the breakout room. With raising babies, like I said, you want to raise them separately so they don't compete for food with adults. If you keep them in smaller tanks, and I learned this from my mentor, Tom Allen, who's pictured right there, the smaller the tank, the easier it is for them to also find the food. So they find their food and they eat it. You remember, you're doing that 20-second. If they're eating it in 20 seconds, you're done and over with your feeding. As they grow, you incrementally raise the size of the tank, and that way they will always be in an environment where they find the food, eat it quickly, and can grow. That's where I'll leave it at that. And if anybody wants to know about, raising babies anymore after that, ask in the breakout room, and there's a few extra things I can tell you.
And maybe in the breakout room, you could talk a little bit about when you make culling decisions and, sorting decisions, things like that. Does that sound reasonable?
It does. I'd be happy to.
Good. Well, those were the questions that I had sort of from the general meeting, and there were a few things that I suggested go into the breakout room. I want to thank everybody for being respectful and using the chat. And Willie, I'll turn it back over to you if you have any final comments before Kurt sends us to breakout rooms.
Yeah.